We will be starting with Avengers Endgame did the impossible and we failed to realize it. It's by the Canadian lad.
Avengers!
Let me know if it's too loud. Is it full HD? Yeah.
Assemble.
Alright, lads,
Oh my god,
so
I
it's been
remember
5
that one.
years
I was
since
so
the release of Endgame, and I'm gonna say it out loud, Avengers Endgame is the best comic book movie of all time. I just watched the movie again and I thought I have to make this video, because what this movie did 5 years ago was actually quite an impossible task. I mean, think about it. Some of the recent Marvel shows like Secret Invasion, She-Hulk, or Thor Love and
we're not
Thunder
talking
didn't
about
stick the landing
that.
at all, while Endgame was a culmination
Even
of
Thor was like saying, I'm ashamed of the movie.
22 movies. Now, if Endgame hadn't existed, Infinity War would have been the best comic book movie of all time. But all of the efforts of Infinity War would have gone into vain if Endgame hadn't stick the landing. So you're not just tasked with writing a finale to 22 movies, but you're tasked with writing a finale to Infinity War. And that in and of itself should seem impossible. Every dialogue Thanos said in Endgame sounds like a quote. For example, this one.
And as long as there are those that remember what was, there will always be those that are unable to accept what can be. They will resist.
And this goes to show how
So
well
good.
written the villain of this movie was. Now, I'm going to point out 5 important reasons why Avengers Endgame is probably the greatest comic book movie of all time, and let's see if you and I agree on it. Number 1, the film took itself seriously. Okay, so there
Yeah.
are a few jokes here and there.
Like, Marvel usually doesn't take itself as seriously. They like to butcher us with jokes, and sometimes they nail it, but a lot of times they don't, and it sounds more cringe than anything else. And in this movie, they really had it together because it needed to have that more serious feeling, and that's why the jokes were not as prominent in this one.
As there is in every Marvel movie, but this movie knew exactly when to be serious and when to be funny. For instance, in the opening, we see Tony and Nebula playing paper football in the moments of despair. But only 3 minutes later, Nebula sits Tony up in the chair because Tony is moments away from dying and Nebula does not want to see a hero die on the floor. Another example could be this scene.
Are you seriously telling me that your plan to save the universe is based on Back to the Future? Is it? No.
Here, Tony makes a joke about Scott's plan being based on the movie Back to the Future. But notice it only takes about 10 seconds for the movie to get serious again.
But I lost someone very important to me. A lot of people did. And now, we have a chance to bring her back, to bring everyone back. And you're telling me that you won't even...
That's right, Scott. I won't even.
And this is
Oh my
one
God,
of the
they're so
biggest reasons
serious.
this movie connected with the audience. Because the characters that we saw on the screen were taking themselves seriously.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there won't be any jokes or laughter in between, but Endgame does a fantastic job of balancing it out. Number 2, the film took 30 minutes to address the consequences of Infinity War. Okay, so the ending of Infinity War pretty much sent shockwaves across the world because nobody thought Marvel was really gonna let Thanos win by eliminating half the universe.
Yeah.
So to re-establish that shock and show us the consequences, Marvel took a good half an hour to let the audience feel what's at stake here. You see,
Yeah.
had they only shown us the beginning of the movie
Tyler,
where
thanks so
Hawkeye
much.
loses his family to the snap and then move on to the scene where Scott Lang shows up at the Avengers HQ, then this is what we would have missed. Tony having a resentment towards Steve because from Tony's perspective, Cap didn't do enough. Tony's guilt of losing Peter Parker. Thor saying his first lines at the 15th minute mark because that's how much of a shock he received after failing to go for the head. Captain America entering into space for the first time. Because for a guy out of time who saw almost everything happening in the world, witnessing space was the only thing left for him. And we saw him
Yeah.
doing that too. We learn about Thanos' true purpose, which was bringing balance to the universe. Steve doing therapy sessions with snap survivors to overcome their trauma. Scott Lang finding out what happened in his absence. And lastly, Black Widow revealing what the Avengers truly mean to her. Now, all of the scenarios are consequences of Thanos' snap. So had Marvel thought about trimming the duration of the movie and cut out these crucial scenes, yes, the movie would still be enjoyable, but wouldn't
But,
connect with
yeah.
the audience as much as
I
it
agree.
did. Keep in mind, there was a whole year between the release of Infinity War and Endgame, so the movie needed to lay the foundation once again for what's at
True.
stake here. You can't just expect the audience to do their homework and come prepared. Sometimes you gotta prep the audience yourself and then blow them up with twists and turns. And that's exactly what Endgame did. Number 3, authentic character development. Now, Endgame had over 30 characters playing a crucial role in the film, and at least 20 of them were major characters. But the surprising part is, all of them got their moment to shine with impactful and
True.
impressive actions. Remarkably, every character remained true to their established personalities and continued their development seamlessly. Let me give you one major example of this.
Honestly, it feels like they had a script writer who was dedicated to every single character individually and who was like a big fan of that character, and you knew the whole story and wanted to give that character the attention it's needed on screen. Like, they really gave attention to every single person, didn't miss anything.
The snap changes everyone after 5 years except for Steve Rogers. We see Tony now living his normal life with a daughter and a wife, Hawkeye, who has chosen a darker path, Black Widow now took on the responsibilities of taking care of the Avengers, Thor has gone in full depression, and Banner, well, he got the most positive outcome from the snap, where he finally found the balance between Banner and the Hulk. But
Yeah.
Captain America is still Captain America, decent and kind. The snap hasn't significantly changed him at all. The first time we
Yeah,
see
Hulk
him after
with
the
the
5 years
downfall.
time jump, we find him leading discussions to help fellow survivors process their trauma, continuing to offer hope and optimism. So why does Steve remain unchanged while others evolve? It's because Cap has done this all before. When Cap went under the ice, he lost everyone he knew. Yes, some were still physically around, but they weren't the same people after 70 years. Like Peggy wasn't the same young Peggy anymore. Steve knows what it feels like to have lost it all. That's why he was trying to look at the brighter side.
You know, I saw a pod of whales when I was coming over the bridge.
In the Hudson.
There's fewer ships, cleaner water.
You know, if you're about to tell me to look on the bright side, I'm about to hit you in the head with a peanut butter sandwich.
Sorry. Force of habit.
And this is what I mean by authentic character development. Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely wrote Infinity War and Endgame so beautifully that it's almost impossible to find a better ending than this. They made our favorite characters go through so much trauma and shock, and yet came up with solutions that fits with the characters' personalities. Number 4, giving us a proper Thor. I know a lot of people didn't like the fact that the Russos made Thor into a fat, depressed, and apathetic type of a character, but you have to understand that they still showed him as the strongest Avenger. How? Let me just show you one detail. In this scene where Thanos was giving his godlike villainy speech, as soon as he stands up, notice Iron Man and Captain America both take a step backwards. But Thor is the only one who takes a step forward. You think this happened randomly? No. It's because the Russo brothers and the writers deliberately wrote this scene to show us that this Thor may be fat, but he is still one of the greatest warriors. And don't forget, Infinity War literally gave us the best Thor in the MCU until now. And I just absolutely love this detail. Tony and Steve take a step back because they want to be cautious. They don't want to be making mistakes. But Thor is just fearless. He has had enough. Another example could be this scene, where the MCU Trinity stands side by side against Thanos. Now notice, even before Cap and Tony arrived here, Thor was already standing alone, staring at Thanos. Which is why Tony literally asks him this.
What's he been doing?
Absolutely nothing.
So while Tony was reviving Cap, telling him to get up, Thor was standing here all alone against Thanos, and then Cap and Tony joined him. This again shows that Thor doesn't wait for help. He genuinely believes he must fight Thanos himself. Cap gets all the credits where he stood up against Thanos and his entire army, which in and of itself is one of the best cinematic scenes in the MCU, but if you think deeply, Thor did it as well. Perhaps not as much cinematic, that's all. So if you're mad that they made Thor fat, then you should also be happy that they made Thor one of the strongest Avengers in this movie. Not just with dialogues, but with actual visual scenes. Number 5, Endgame ends exactly the way Infinity War began. Now to explain this, I have to take you all the way back to Infinity War. The very first line by Thanos in Infinity War was this.
I know what it's like to lose. Feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail nonetheless. It's frightening. Turns the legs to jelly. If I ask you to what end, Dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same.
And what happens at the end of Endgame? Thanos loses. He felt so desperate that he was right, only to fail all the same. So what does he do? Well, you can't run from your destiny, and Thanos knows this. So he sits down and accepts it. So the very first line by Thanos in Infinity War foreshadowed the ending of Avengers
True.
Endgame. And don't forget, these two movies were written and filmed back to back. It's not like they wrote Infinity War, saw which part the audience liked, and then started writing Endgame. No, they wrote both of them together as one big piece. And that's why I believe
That's why-
Avengers Endgame
yeah.
did the impossible, and we
True.
only realize it now.
We don't only realize it now. We knew since day one how epic this movie was and is, and how it's gonna be really hard for Marvel to continue in this level, and they showed and proved that it was almost impossible. But I still have high hopes for some of the movies, like for example Deadpool and Wolverine. I think it's gonna be a good movie. But other movies were so bad. I don't want to see part 2, part 3 of those. I don't want to see any development to some of the newer characters that they brought. I feel like they really need to bring something new and epic and start like a new group of people that we are interested in, superheroes that we are really interested, and a great villain again, you know? So yeah, it's gonna be really hard, but one day they will nail it, and then when they nail it, we Marvel fans are gonna be back and hyped again. Until then, we're just sitting and praying. But yeah, that's it.